Study hall about Batman. Hello, boys and girls, and welcome back to another session of Max Scoville's Study Hall. I'm your host, Max Scoville, and Study Hall is the show where I take a particular video game that's got an appropriate amount of buzz surrounding it and recommend to you guys a stack of pop culture media that would go along with it well. I imagine a lot of you are recovering right now from San Diego Comic-Con, so here's a little bit of hair of the dog for you, or rather hair of the bat, because Batman. Recently, we've been graced with some surprisingly excellent Batman video games with Rocksteady's Arkham Asylum and Arkham City, and this fall we're getting Arkham Origins by way of the newly formed WB Montreal, and from what I've seen, it looks like more of the same open-world bat fun we've come to expect. A couple years ago on the Destructoid show, while discussing Arkham City, I recommended a short list of comics for fans of the Batman games who were looking for a good starting point, since the almost 75 years of Batman continuity can be a little bit daunting to new fans. Since then, I've had a lot of people ask about which episode that was in and if I could repeat the recommendations, and that was actually one of the things that inspired me to do this show. So today I'm going to give you guys my personal list of must-read Batman comics, all of which are standalone stories or graphic novels that are fairly easy to track down in collected editions and don't require an encyclopedic knowledge of the DC universe to understand. If you've never read a Batman comic book in your life and you're looking for a place to start, then look no further than Frank Miller and David Mazzucchelli's Batman Year One. This 1988 miniseries is a retelling of Bruce Wayne's first year as the Caped Crusader, and it was one of the bigger influences for the character's gritty reboot in Batman Begins. And considering that Arkham Origins is also about Batman's first year on the streets, Year One is a must-read for anybody who's looking forward to the game. Meanwhile, The Long Halloween by Jeph Loeb and Tim Sale more or less picks up where Year One left off, though it can be read as a standalone story, and it follows Batman over the course of a full year as he tracks a killer named Holiday, who, as you might expect, kills people on holidays. While Year One is fairly light on appearances by familiar Batman villains, The Long Halloween goes all out and features a lot of recognizable faces, including Two-Face / Harvey Dent, who plays a central role in the story, the Joker, Poison Ivy, Solomon Grundy, and the Riddler. Bits and pieces of The Long Halloween made their way into The Dark Knight, which I'm guessing everyone with a casual interest in Batman has already seen, but another great book that influenced Christopher Nolan's epic was The Killing Joke, which is Watchmen creator Alan Moore's brilliant, albeit short, examination of Batman and the Joker as mortal enemies. Alan Moore is great because he's basically a crazy English werewolf man who periodically comes out of his castle and then realizes that comic books are getting too stupid and writes something that totally turns the entire medium on its ass. The Killing Joke kind of feels like Alan Moore being like, "Oh, Frank Miller wrote a really good comic? Whatever. Watch this," and then he writes a really good Batman comic. If you're looking for a Batman comic that isn't a complex character analysis or a finely crafted retcon origin story, and you just want a comic where Batman punches bad guys and everyone has really nicely toned butt cheeks and or excessive cleavage, then you should check out Batman Hush. Hush is a 2-volume story by Jeph Loeb that follows a more modern Batman as he tries to solve a mystery. What makes it special, however, is that it's penciled by Jim Lee, and it's basically an excuse for him to draw half the characters in the DC universe as he sees fit, so, you know, with really nicely toned butt cheeks and or excessive cleavage. Story-wise, it's pretty goofy, but it's definitely a fun, action-packed Batman comic that might as well just be called Jim Lee Presents Greatest Butt Cheeks of the DC universe. Anyway, going back to the serious, dark, not goofy at all Batman comics, I don't know what kind of a Batman list this would be if I didn't recommend Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns. Released in 1986, this and Watchmen are often credited with reinventing superhero comics as they currently are. The Dark Knight Returns takes place 10 years after Batman's retirement when he's in his mid-50s, and as the title would suggest, kind of follows his return to crime fighting. It's probably my favorite comic on this entire list, as well as one of my favorite comics of all time ever, and it's just as much about Batman as it is about Reagan-era political climate or a commentary on American media in the 1980s, and there are parts of it that just give me chills to this day. It's wonderful. Recently, The Dark Knight Returns and Batman Year One were both turned into animated movies, but I don't recommend those in the least. I think recently we've lost sight of what an adaptation is, especially with comic books coming to the big screen every 2 weeks. Adaptation implies a certain amount of compromise and transformation during a subject's transition between mediums. DC Comics has gotten in the habit of releasing animated films that claim to be adaptations of comics when really they're more like visual translations, faithfully recreating the action in each panel of the comics to a fault, completely losing sight of the fact that what looks cool on a page doesn't always look good on a screen, and this is a problem that's shared by movies like Sin City and Watchmen and 300. It just makes the pacing kind of weird, and the dialogue's kind of awkward and choppy. I know Christopher Nolan's approach to The Dark Knight Rises was kind of hit or miss with a lot of people, but I thought it was absolutely brilliant for actually being a subtle, grounded adaptation of The Dark Knight Returns that managed to fit in with the rest of his movies. So here's your homework. Go read Batman Year One, The Long Halloween, The Killing Joke, and The Dark Knight Returns, and then watch Christopher Nolan's Batman trilogy, and just pay close attention because he managed to weave in a lot of very subtle nods to the source material, all the while making a movie on his own terms. Those movies aren't just good because they're dark and gritty and Batman sounds like this all the time. He actually obviously paid a lot of attention to the source material and managed to make films using them. Of course, if you want to watch some cartoons, just go watch or rewatch the first 3 seasons of Batman the Animated Series. I think it's some of the best Western animation that has ever graced television, and it holds up remarkably well for what was supposed to be a children's cartoon. Finally, if you think regular Batman is boring, well, first of all, shut up, and second of all, there are a few very weird Elseworlds alternate reality interpretations of him. In Batman Red Reign, Batman turns into a vampire and fights Dracula because his vampire coven keeps eating homeless people. Okay, sure. In Batman Gotham by Gaslight, it's the late 1800s, and Batman squares off against Jack the Ripper and also hangs out with Sigmund Freud. And the Batmobile is just a regular horse because cars weren't invented yet. Last but not least, in Superman Red Sun, Batman is an anarchist in Soviet Russia called Batmankov, and he wears a little hat with ears on it. I mean, like different ears. They're over his regular ears, not just the pointy things. And also, Superman's a communist. So anyway, if you've been looking for some Batman comics to check out while waiting for Arkham Origins, there you go. Those are all my personal favorites. And hey, if you've already read everything I mentioned, then go play outside. Go learn how to throw grappling hooks or batarangs or something. Anyway, as always, I encourage you guys to leave your own recommendations, requests, suggestions, and deepest, darkest confessions in the comments, or just holler at me on Twitter and tune in next week when I get real conceptual and we talk about BioShock Infinite, Deponia, Elysium, Cities in the Clouds, and the idea of fantastical caste systems as social commentary. Until next time, I am the host YouTube deserves, but not the one it needs right now.